I'm gonna be honest, I really don't know how to start this. And I also don't really know how to edit. But let's talk about Autism Speaks. A couple of notes first. I'm using my laptop to have my script, so if you see me looking in this direction, it's at that. I kind of shoved a couple of takes together, so this may or may not be a bit of a Frankenstein. Of course, on the day that I have to film, they're out there spraying the fields. If you hear a plane, it's that. They're pretty loud. Oops. I have a humidifier right there, also pretty loud. Sorry if it kicks on, I really can't stop it. I'm a little bit congested. You probably can hear it in my voice a little bit. Stop to cough, don't worry about it. I got my drink too, so like, you see me doing that, okay. And finally, I really, truly do not know what I am doing with editing. As of filming this, I have about an hour or two of editing experience ever. So this might be a little bit interesting. But without further ado, let's get into Autism Speaks. Honestly, the title card kind of says it all, but you still have probably about 20 minutes, if not more, left of the video, so clearly I have more to say. Basically, to understand Autism Speaks, I think we should first look into how and why it was founded. Throughout my research, the main reason that I could find for the founding was that the co-founders, Bob Wright, aka former executive and CEO of both NBC and General Electric, and his wife, Suzanne Wright, had a grandson diagnosed with autism around 2004. So they decided to make his life kind of a living hell because they just didn't like how his brain worked. It's weird. I can't find literally anything on this kid. Like, I don't know how old he is. I had to actively search and dig for his name, which is kind of surprising when his family is billionaires, and he is kind of the reason for the founding of one of the most well-known autism charities ever. Like, I don't know how old he is. I don't even know if he's still alive. And that gives a little bit of insight onto how they view autistic people. Spoilers, it's mostly like objects. In 2005, the Wrights began their tirade on autistic people in the form of a charity. And honestly, that's really the extent of the founding that is necessary. Autistic grandson, straight to destructive charity. Makes sense, I guess. Moving on from the founding, let's look at what they actually do and support. This part is likely going to be the bulk of the video. They have done a lot of very gross things for a long time, about 17 years now. There is quite a bit to cover. If you boil it straight to the basics, Autism Speaks isn't that horrible in theory. Let me emphasize the in theory part. They claim to support the families of young autistic children and want to improve the quality of life for high-needs autistic people, namely young boys, which is not great. Other people deserve to have higher quality of life too, but okay. But dig really any deeper, like at all, and you will get into the rather shaky history. For starters, the family support only includes less than 1% of their spending history. Less than 1% of their budget was spent on their highest priority. Instead of spending their absolutely massive budget, about 60 million in 2018 for reference, on their top priority, they spent about half of it on awareness and lobbying, which I will get into, trust me. Other than the wonky spending, they don't actually include autistic people on their board of directors. There is only one autistic person out of 26 on the board, but in contrast, there are 19 members that represent major corporations. And by represent, I mean they are either current or former CEOs, senior executives, basically top dogs in the company. And those major companies range from AMC Networks, White Castle, SC Johnson, and more. Quite a diverse group for a very not diverse board. Yikes. If you couldn't already tell, I think it's fairly obvious their priority is not actually autistic people, or not even their families like they claim. Their priority is money. It has always been money. It probably will always be money. From the very beginning, their founder has been a CEO or executive at an absolutely major company. It's money, and they're not even really hiding it, or at least not hiding it well. Throughout the video, I have been saying autistic people or high needs instead of the gross functioning labels that they really like to promote. But don't tell Autism Speaks, because they will yell at me, an actually autistic person. They really think that I should be using person-first language. There are tons of issues with that, but first and foremost, why would you need to be reminded that I am a person? Do you forget that I am a living, breathing human being in front of you just because I'm autistic? Like, even if I don't say person with autism, I'm still a person. That's still implied. I am autistic. No more, no less. You wouldn't tell a black person to say they're a person with black. You wouldn't tell a blind person to say they're a person with blind. Being autistic is an integral part of mine and many other autistic people's selves. This is part of me. Really, any other examples, and you'll just realize how gross it really is to try and make people phrase things to remind people that they are people. Like, it's not cool. I'm not going to talk about the functioning levels right now, but I will get into it. Namely, when we talk about the Nazi that they're really good friends with. Thanks. So, this is a pretty hefty topic, but one of the worst things that Autism Speaks does, if I had to rank them, is support and actively promote ABA therapy. Saying therapy very loosely in this context, you will see why. ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis, and that's essentially just a bunch of jargon and fancy talk for treating young children like animals and like they are broken and wrong. I'm going to link a 15-minute YouTube video from Book is Bored. It's a pretty hard watch, but they do a very good job of explaining ABA in a way that I feel I cannot, as this is not the focus of the video. Essentially, this therapy practice boils down to trying to solve very young children, like generally between 2 and like 6-ish years old, of their autism. It forces them into overstimulating, upsetting, and triggering situations so that a practitioner, often the child's parent or parents, can sit there and watch and correct the distressed child's behaviors. They attempt to train this child in the way that you would train a dog, by giving them small treats like singular M&Ms when behavior that they approve of is shown, and depending on the therapist, even using physical harm and violence to negatively reinforce behavior they do not approve of. They try to remove all autistic traits from this child. They want this child to be a completely different person. ABA is horrible. It is abuse. There is no excuses for it. There's no way around it. Honestly, this is a personally difficult topic for me to talk about because I have seen the effects of ABA on people that I care about. One of my friends, who will remain anonymous, was in ABA when they were young, around 4 years old. They are now afraid to be really any form of autistic, to show any of their traits that they naturally have. They were abused, flatline abused. They were shocked when they had meltdowns, which are a natural part of being autistic, by the way. And they were punished by their own parents for stimming, which is self-stimulating behavior. It's like clapping hands, you know, it helps with regulation. And they were forced to hide every single part of themselves for years. Please watch the video that I linked. It's very, very well done. I think it's very informative and good to know. take a breath, because it really does not get much better throughout. A bit lighter topic now. Remember towards the beginning of the video when I mentioned that roughly half of their budget was on spreading awareness and lobbying? It's time to get into that. Autism Speaks has some interesting advertising history. They've done plenty of campaigns since their 2005 origins, one of which has recently resurfaced on social media. Personally, I saw it on TikTok, but I'm sure it's many other places.
I am autism. I'm visible in your children, but if I can help it, I am invisible to you until it's too late. I know where you live, and guess what? I live there too. I hover around all of you. I know no color barrier, no religion, no morality, no currency. I speak your language fluently, and with every voice I take away, I acquire yet another language. I work very quickly. I work faster than pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. And if you are happily married, I will make sure that your marriage fails. Your money will fall into my hands, and I will bankrupt you for my own self-gain. I don't sleep, so I make sure you don't either.
Honestly, that kind of speaks for itself. That aired, from what I can find, in 2009 as an ad on television. If I am correct, it also aired in like children's programming mostly. So like it would air between cartoons in 2009, which weird. Anyhow, I don't really think I have to explain why that's bad, but you know, just in case. Essentially, they are kind of treating autism like it's a murderer, like autism personified as a murderer, which is weird to say the least. It's a weird video, honestly. Watch the entire thing, it gets worse, trust me. But for the sake of time, you can have that clip. It does not take a genius to know that it's kind of messed up to treat autism like it's, you know, gonna kill you or your kids. It's not. Go tell your local autistic child that they're a murderer today, folks. Don't actually do that. That was sarcasm. There's another ad. Technically it's a documentary, but they kind of read the same when Autism Speaks does it. But I will get into that later. That's another genuinely upsetting topic, so I shall hold off on that for a minute. With another glance back into the founding, let's talk about inspiration porn. The definition of inspiration porn is the portrayal of people with disabilities or other uncommon life circumstances as being inspirational to able-bodied people or other common reference group on the basis of their life circumstances. Let me be clear, disabled people do amazing things that are awe-inspiring, but just living is not one of them. I am not some hero for just living my day-to-day standard life while being autistic. Like, disabled people are no more inspiring than able-bodied people. There are some really, phenomenal and incredible videos from disabled creators talking about the nuances and history of inspiration porn. I really recommend checking them out. You can just Google inspiration porn and it'll pop up with loads of results. Some really great videos. I personally recommend one from a creator named Jessica Kelgan-Fultzard. I believe is how you say her name. I've been following her for a couple years now. She's very good at her job, and she does a really good job of explaining what inspiration porn really is. Anyhow, there is in fact a reason why I brought up inspiration porn in relation to Autism Speaks. And that is because Autism Speaks is riddled with it. Very, very fond of it. I just googled autism stickers, and the first several results are all in relation to Autism Speaks and just completely doused with inspiration porn. And also lots and lots of puzzle pieces, which is, again, not great, because fun fact, I am not incomplete because of my autism. That's just not true. It's not great. It's pretty bad, actually. like any autistic people simply existing in a neurotypical friendly way, as we have seen with ABA, is considered inspiring and incredible by Autism Speaks. And this technically isn't directly related, but it feels relevant. Autism is definitely a disability. It's not a physical disability, but it is, because of society and the way that they treat autistic people, a disability. There's tons of nuance within social versus physical disabilities, and it's a whole thing. There are, again, many great videos about that. And disabled is not a bad word. You can say it. In fact, you should say it. Different ability. No, it's a disability. I am disabled. Anyhow, the fun is unfortunately over. Back into some of the very bad things that Autism Speaks does. Remember that Nazi that I mentioned at the beginning? Time to talk about him. He's a character. His name was Hans Asperger. You may or may not recognize the name from a autism-related diagnosis. That is very outdated, by the way. The two merged into one diagnosis, autism spectrum disorder, in 2013, so kind of out of date at this point. Essentially, to oversimplify, Asperger was a Nazi who did a lot of research into like many different mental disorders. Most well known is autism. And his research was actually very advanced for the time. Like, he did a lot of like really incredible research and made a ton of advancements in the mental disorder realm. Like, he did a lot of good research. But because we can't have nice things, what he did with his groundbreaking research was decide which autistic people would be allowed to live and be slaves in concentration camps, and which would be murdered and slaughtered. Those who survived the evaluation were considered to have Asperger's syndrome, which is where the diagnosis came from, and the rest weren't technically named, but we do know that they had autism, more than likely. Autism Speaks was a fan of him for a long time, and while they technically don't really support him anymore, there are still multiple pages dedicated to him on their website, so not ideal. I do have more to talk about with him, but we will get into that can of worms later. That about wraps up the history portion, so on to the final section. Gonna start this one off on a banger. Let's talk about the mother who murdered her 3-year-old autistic daughter. I promise this is gonna be the last time I talk about their advertising, but this time it's a documentary, so technically they are different. Essentially, there was a documentary released by Autism Speaks in May of 2006. In this documentary, they interviewed some neurotypical mothers of autistic children. One of these mothers said that she contemplated committing a murder-suicide of her young daughter because she was too hard to take care of. She said this with her child in the room. I would show the clip, but it is very upsetting and don't want to get into that. And allegedly, for legal reasons, she only did not kill herself and her daughter because she had a different kid who wasn't a burden on her. Only 4 days after this documentary aired, a woman named Karen McCarran, suffocated her 3-year-old daughter Katie to death. She put a plastic bag over her head for several minutes and killed her. Then she went to the grocery store to get herself ice cream. She celebrated murdering her own child. Her tiny, defenseless toddler. What is truly very upsetting to me is that she is only 3 years older than me. Karen only got 36 years in prison. She murdered her own child. She killed her toddler. 36 years is not remotely enough for brutally murdering your own child just because she was autistic. Wish Katie a happy 20th birthday on July 22nd this year. She deserves it. And if you're ever in Resurrection Cemetery in Illinois, give her a rock, because they last longer than flowers. This is recent. This is what Autism Speaks does. They kill autistic kids, and they do not show remorse. She was 3. She is still 3. She will always be 3. May she rest, and I hope she can stay far away from anywhere her mother could ever be. On a slightly lighter note after that, Autism Speaks has pretty much directly caused repeated budget cuts, and for lack of a better word, stolen donations from actual autistic-run organizations. Autism Speaks is, unfortunately, one of the most well-known organizations for autism, like, ever. Most people donate to them without really doing much research, if any, and I personally know people in my own life who have donated to them until they found out how bad they truly are. I don't blame the people. Autism Speaks is manipulative, and they're very well known. It's getting a lot wider known that they're bad, but not as well as it should be. Anyhow, if I were to recommend organizations to donate to, I would personally suggest Autism Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN. I got a lot of really good information from their website, and they are run by and for autistic people. And don't think I should just stop existing, so that's cool. Anyhow, my final point is about the functioning labels that the Nazi promoted. High functioning and low functioning mean absolutely nothing. I'm going to talk a bit about my personal experience because I find it easier to digest and consume information when it's on a person-to-person level rather than just spouted at you generally. So, according to functioning labels, I would be considered both high and low functioning. I have sensory issues and can have meltdowns if they aren't properly taken care of, but inversely, I can live mostly on my own, or at least as well as a 16-year-old can. I can cook for myself, take care of my laundry, take care of my own personal hygiene, self-sufficient. I wouldn't need a caregiver, so I would be considered high functioning. But on the other side of the spectrum, I had to go to occupational therapy for several months to try and get my sensory processing easier to control and try and make me easier digestible, basically, for society, make it easier for me to function in day-to-day life. So I'd be considered low functioning. These labels are entirely arbitrary, and they are extremely subjective too. And besides meaning nothing, they actively harm the community. A person who has a high needs level is not low or non-functioning, as I have heard them referred to as. They are a person just as much as any other. They just need additional help and support. Nonverbal people can still communicate, just not in the way that you would expect. And they can still hear and process what you are saying to or about them. Too many times have I seen people, sometimes their own caregiver, talk about nonverbal or low-functioning autistic people, often children, right in front of them, like they are a rock in the room who cannot hear or see or understand you. That is not true. I have seen people who are not their dedicated caregiver respond for autistic people because they believe that they couldn't respond on their own, when that is not true. And on the opposite side, I have seen people flat out deny low needs or high functioning autistic people the accommodations they need simply because they don't look autistic enough, which is not true. Again, sensing a theme. I have been both of these autistic people. I have been both the low and high functioning people. These labels are damaging. They are extremely harmful. do not use functioning labels. They are outdated, they are wrong, they are harmful, and they were popularized by a Nazi in order to kill autistic people. So not great. If you must categorize an autistic person, which honestly I don't see many situations in which you would, but you never know, use need labels instead. They are much more specific instead of just vaguely saying, yes or no, this person can function. It is, this person needs support in these specific areas. Ideally, do not use labels at all, like situationally describe their needs or ask them, because they can tell you what's happening in their body and what they need much easier than you could guess. Autism speaks is bad. Have a nice day. But on a serious note, thank you for dealing with this. I'm sure it was honestly a bit of a disaster and probably fairly long. Listen to autistic people. When we say that autism speaks is bad, we say it for a reason. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.